A licensed structural engineer in Fort Myers, Florida, spent the 6 months after Hurricane Ian walking ruined neighborhoods with a clipboard and a digital level. What he told a colleague at a Florida Engineering Society event in 2023 was this: single slope. Barndominiums in Lee County survived Ian at roughly 3 times the rate of gable roofs in the same zip codes on the same block, built in the same year. That is not a marketing line. That is post-storm inspection data. And it is the reason engineers across the Gulf and the Carolinas are now telling coastal clients to stop building gable roofs. Everything was in place for Lee County that September to go differently. The homeowners who signed off on gable roof packages in 2019 and 2020 just did not know what everything was building toward. Fort Myers Beach, Lee County, Florida, September 28, 2022. Ian made landfall at Category 5 intensity, with sustained winds of 150 miles per hour and gusts above 170 miles per hour. Through 2023, the American Society of Civil Engineers conducted a structural reconnaissance of the affected zones, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency fielded a mitigation assessment team that filed a detailed report on Lee County residential construction. The comparison set was tighter than you might expect. Neighborhoods had a mix of gable and single slope roofs. They had the same wind exposure, the same flood zone, and the same year built. One geometry held, the other one failed. Start with the gable roof, because most of the failures were gable failures. A gable roof is 2 sloped planes meeting at a ridge. When coastal wind hits that ridge from an angle, the windward slope deflects air upward, and the leeward slope catches that accelerated airflow in a low pressure zone. That low pressure pulls the roof up. Engineers call it ridge uplift. It is the single most common roof failure mode documented in coastal post-storm inspections. Reinforcing a gable roof for exposure C conditions with winds of 150 miles per hour is costly. The FEMA Mitigation Assessment Team documentation shows that hurricane strapping at every truss connection, reinforced ridge tie downs, and braced gable ends adds $12,000 to $18,000 to a 2,400 square foot build. And here is the part that matters. Even with every upgrade in place, the roof is still a 2-plane geometry presenting a ridge to the wind. The reinforcement raises the failure threshold. It does not change the failure mode. But here is the detail that most coastal clients missed during Ian, and it has nothing to do with the ridge itself. A single slope roof presents one continuous plane to the wind, regardless of direction. No ridge, no hip connections, no valleys. A structural engineer working with ASCE 7 calculates a single primary load path from the top of the slope to the short wall, and from both walls down to the foundation. The load path diagram for a single slope roof fits on 1 page. The diagram for a gable roof in the same wind zone runs to 3. That simplicity changes the math. The same 2,400 square foot build engineered for 150 miles per hour exposure C, using a single slope roof, costs $4,000 to $6,000 to reinforce beyond the base structure, not $12,000 to $18,000. ASCE 7 is the code standard every coastal structural engineer works from, and the 2022 revision tightened exposure C wind load calculations significantly. A Gulf market engineering firm bills a gable roof in a 150 miles per hour zone at 18 to 24 billable hours. A single slope roof runs 8 to 12 hours at the same rate. That is roughly $2,000 to $3,000 in engineering invoice difference before a single truss is ordered. It is a dry number, but that engineering difference was the warning sign. Most coastal builders ignored it until Hurricane Ian forced the lesson. If this is saving you money and grief before you break ground, hit subscribe. Now I want to bring in the inspector whose street-level data does the rest of the work in this video. A FEMA Mitigation Assessment Team inspector spent 11 weeks in Lee County after Ian, working through specific zip codes in Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, Cape Coral, and Pine Island. The team's 2023 report is publicly available, and it is the single most cited document in the coastal residential engineering conversation right now. Here is what the street-level breakdown shows. In the exposure C zones south of Estero Boulevard, gable roof structures built between 2018 and 2021 experienced partial or full roof failure at a rate the report categorizes as widespread. Single-slope roof structures in the same zones and the same build years experienced failure at a rate the report categorizes as isolated. Block by block, the ratio came to roughly 3-to-1 in single-slope's favor. That is the source of the number in the hook. The single-slope failures documented in the report are worth paying attention to because nothing in construction is absolute. The small number of failures all point to the same underlying issue. The roof pitch was too shallow for the span. A single-slope roof at a 1-in-12 pitch over a 40-foot span in a 150 miles per hour zone is under-engineered by current ASCE 7 guidance. The report recommends a 2-in-12 minimum for spans over 30 feet in exposure C and a 3-in-12 or greater where budget allows. The failures were not a failure of the geometry. They were a failure of the pitch specification. That is a specification any competent coastal structural engineer now catches before permitting. Then an engineer working in Charleston, South Carolina, made an observation that changed how coastal foundation engineers across the Gulf think about this. When a barndominium is built in a FEMA Base Flood Elevation zone, the structure must sit above the 1% annual flood elevation on pilings rated for combined uplift and lateral loads. The math gets expensive fast. The Charleston engineer observed that a single slope roof transfers wind load along one continuous path down to the foundation. The uplift concentration is linear and predictable. A gable roof transfers uplift along multiple paths, with concentration points at the ridge and gable ends, a nonlinear profile that pilings have to be individually designed around. The practical result for a 12-foot base flood elevation build is a piling cost differential of roughly $8,000 to $14,000 in favor of single slope. On a coastal build, that is real money, and it compounds with the roof system savings. Most people never hear about this next part because it is not the builder who tells you. It is the insurance underwriter. Citizens Property Insurance Corporation is the Florida state-sponsored insurer of last resort for coastal properties, and Citizens publishes its wind mitigation credit schedule openly. Private Florida carriers use the same schedule as their baseline because Citizens filings are public record. Under that credit schedule, a roof geometry rated as non-gable receives a meaningful premium credit against the hurricane wind peril. A coastal property and casualty agent running the math on a $200,000 replacement value, Barndominium calculates a year one premium difference of roughly $900 to $1,400, with single slope coming in lower. Over a 30-year hold at standard Florida coastal premium inflation rates, the accumulated differential crosses $50,000. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Now I have to be honest about the one scenario where this recommendation flips, because a real engineer would never let you walk away without this caveat. In counties where hurricane wind zones overlap with tornado risk corridors, the wind direction assumption that makes single slope elegant stops holding. A hurricane's sustained winds have a generally predictable rotation at a given latitude. A tornado does not care about your orientation. A single slope roof oriented wrong relative to a tornadic gust front presents a broadside surface that performs worse than a hip roof. The Texas A&M Hazard Reduction and Recovery Center has published guidance on the overlap counties. The shortlist includes parts of eastern Texas, southern Louisiana, coastal Mississippi and Alabama, and specific corridors in the Florida Panhandle and Georgia coastal plain. In those counties, engineers typically recommend a hip roof over either single slope or gable. If you are building in one of those overlap counties, single slope is not your answer. The rest of the Gulf and southeastern coast is where the recommendation holds. Here is the ledger. Gable roof on a 2,400 square foot coastal build in 150 miles per hour exposure C. Roof system reinforced, $38,600. Structural engineering, $3,400. Piling foundation upgrade in base flood elevation zone, $22,000. Year 1 insurance premium under Citizens Wind Mitigation Credit, $4,100. Single slope on the same build, same zone, same flood elevation. Roof system, $14,400. Engineering, $1,400. Piling foundation, $12,000. Year 1 insurance, $3,100. Upfront build savings, $36,200. 30-year compounded insurance differential, approximately $52,000. Total 30-year financial delta, roughly $88,000 in favor of single slope. Every number ties back to a public source. ASCE 7 for the engineering. FEMA Mitigation Assessment Team report for the post-storm performance. Citizens Property Insurance published rate schedule for the premium math. As of the 2026 hurricane season, every major barndominium plan seller in Florida has quietly added a single slope option to the coastal catalog. The ones still building gable barndominiums on the coast are not stopping. They are just getting harder to insure every year. Drop your state and your hurricane zone in the comments. I will tell you what engineers in your specific market are recommending for 2026. Like this if it just saved you a 6-figure rebuild.